All right, recording. Recording in progress. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Clare Vassallo, for being with us for this interview about the Anthology of Mischievous Maltese Literature, which you mostly translated in full, except for two of the pieces. One of them, which was by Alfred Buttigieg, This Droplet, which was translated by Raymond Fatchol back in the day, and the story by Lorraine Vella, which was translated by Kat Storace, called These Four Rooms. But you have translated all the other pieces, and it's pretty much consistent with your tradition of translating basically most of Malta's foremost authors. So you have translated Trevor Zara, Pierre Melak, Rita Saliba, Lara Calleja, and you've also translated Duncan himself, although not yet published. We know and we are aware that this work exists. So without a shadow of any doubt, you are one of Malta's foremost literary translators. At least that's how I would describe you. Can you tell us a bit more about you and what you do, and what is your position in the world of literature and books?
Okay, I think coming to literary translation is can be a nice long road. At first, and I think that's what worked with me. First is the world of literature itself. First, you're a reader. You have the opportunity. I took a degree in English literature, philosophy, critical thinking, linguistics, and then a PhD in semiotics, which is all about really different ways of communicating, really analyzing meaning and the creation, communication of meaning, the structures of worlds we build up, what we consider the real world, fictional worlds, possible worlds, overlapping of these worlds. So with a sort of long background in this sort of consideration of critical reading and a lot of reading literature, it was really a privilege to start to see writers from our own, small island, our own tradition, equally people immersed in literature, in thought, in ideas, and so many of them feel very strongly that they will write it in Maltese. They know that they can write in English and immediately get at a wider audience. But part of, it seems from the few, when I did speak about this and actually interviewed a few writers about this, I'd written an article for a paper for the Times, that they feel what they're doing, this sort of authentically, has to be written in Maltese. Its context is Malta, its language is Malta, the way we use language. So, and I respect that. And so my challenge is to try and keep something that is the way we use language here in another language, and to not make it seem either too strange or banal or too literal, that somehow to get a sense of the feeling. In these, there's quite a bit of anger in these stories, to try and get the feeling, to try and do it in a whole other language and yet not betray the context in which they're situated. I did my best.
That was a very interesting reply, especially on the point where you mentioned that translation actually incentivizes the local authors to write in their own language, because they wouldn't be worrying about the prospect of not having their work being read by foreigners. They can rest assured that there are translators available out there who can bridge this gap. So this is a very interesting point in the sense that literary translators actually strengthen and incentivize the local language. I would like to hear more about you from this interesting topic, because you are also one of the first literary translators who have been so prolific. Tell me a little bit about the history of Maltese literary translation. Where are we at right now?
Okay, so we are a multilingual and multicultural island. We have never been monolingual, and I doubt we ever will be. But our language is strong, and so far it seems here to stay. So a lot of work didn't used to be translated. There isn't much of a strong history of translation. If it's not, for instance, maybe in religious terms, from Latin, from Italian into Maltese, the Bible, of course, there is a wonderful story of Bible translation into Maltese and the way it forged the language. It played, so translation, often in the background, is very active in achieving, in this case, with our language, an agreement eventually on the alphabet, on a sense of identity. It starts with, of course, with Vassalli, with Michelanton Vassalli, and his emphasis on, between when the knights left, the French came and then the British. He lived taht tlet saltnit, and under these three regimes. And he felt very strongly that we have to stop speaking in other people's languages. We have to stop our administration in Italian. We have to resist trying to learn to do everything in English, as the British, became, even though he had a lot of sympathy, and they had a lot of sympathy with him. But beside the point, he felt the identity of Malta was in its language, and in the language is the culture. And one of the books he started working on was, in fact, the Bible, the Acts of the Apostles. And he felt that, the religion is so central to the culture. By providing that central book in the language of the people, there they are, just imitating what they're hearing. Very often people would go to church, would know their prayers and not even know what they meant.
Yeah,
because they didn't know Italian. They just repeated. Even the early schools that the British, say, with Sarah Austin set up, one of the things she noticed, all the textbooks were in Italian, but the children didn't speak Italian. So they just learned to repeat. They weren't learning anything. So translation helped in that sense to try and look at the language as actually something that could expand to take on all thoughts, all complex ideas. Because until very, very recently, and I'd say even just 20 years, there was still that attitude that Maltese was not able to express certain complicated issues, certain theoretical notions. So one of the things, again, where translation, I think, has played a big role, is in the setting up of the Department of Translation Studies at university in 2003. Now, this was done with a big incentive of the EU that were just about to join the following year, and the fact that we realized Malta had no translators. We had some interpreters because of conference interpreting, but no translators because it was assumed we have two languages. If it's in English, you read it in English. If it's in Maltese, you read it in Maltese. And that was that. So we started, and it's exactly 20 years ago, 2003, 2004. And in these 20 years, we have produced a lot of, I don't know the full number. We did a tracer study in the department just this year, Claudine Borge mostly saw to it. And the results are excellent. All our students are employed in very interesting places in translation, in culture, in heritage, in diplomacy, in cultural mediation roles. So again, with this setting up of the translation department, a lot of people were actually trained in doing translation in practice, theory, and history of translation. And I started off, where I came from, English literature and semiotics, teaching theory of translation, because that was sort of my field. And I realized after, I can't keep talking about translation and not doing it. It's a bit ridiculous. You have to practice what you're talking about. So I started then, and the first stories I translated were Pierre Meillat's, which are really lovely stories.
So that's a very good background, which I'm sure can help us understand the intricacies of translating this book, which you also described as having a very angry feel to it. Can you give us your general perspective of these pieces, which basically include the most controversial literary pieces in Maltese published in the last 40 years? How can you describe them? What do you think about them in a general way?
I think there's a sort of underlying cultural restrictiveness, whether it is in the economic sense, the social, that people might have desires, wishes for bigger things, but seem very controlled in this small space, and even smaller in their town, in their village, in their football club. And opportunities, a lot of them were written in the 80s and 90s. The 80s were a bleak time. People were leaving. There didn't seem to be much going on in terms of, entertainment, culture. It was a very bleak time. So this feeling of people, young people, having desires that were going to go nowhere. So they're taken out in violence, in drugs, in sex, but sex as an end in itself without a sort of relationship. So I feel there's a lot of this frustration and anger. But I also like this sense of sometimes a lighter touch, like Stanio gives it a lighter touch. He's still making the same sort of comments. Litkis Sersowi, Alex Velagera, there is this sense of what we are familiar with hearing, these attitudes, this male macho attitude, boasting about sexual prowess, being overheard. And from, this person thinking he's blowing his own trumpet to really sounding ridiculous. When you listen to him carefully, he's just an idiot, another idiot. And I think that's part of what we're getting here, this overhearing. Emmanuel Mifsud, that tragedy of those young ones, the drugs, the football, the violence. And I knew people like that. I'm sure you knew people like that too. They're people he overheard at the football, as he says, in the critical piece that accompanies it. He used to go to the football matches, Emmanuel. He heard these people, he knew. And this overhearing and working it into a literary piece that carries weight, carries angst, carries a lot of that desperation. I think it's done very well. It's done beautifully.
I think you are very right. And in fact, it has this collection of stories about bad things about our country. But that's what literature is also about. It's not about the romantic and the passionate, and it's also about reality as it is. And what I find striking in the anthology is that all the authors follow this consistent literary trend, from Emmanuel Mifsud, José Stagno, and also the later ones like Alex Velagera. They're all writing about realistic and ugly aspects of the country, which traditionally have been left out in literature. Also because I think we were expected in literature to, also in journalism, there is this very common pressure and prerequisite, hidden rule, so to speak, that you are allowed only to speak and write about what's good and what's positive, while the ugly thing should be taboo, because that shames us, and that puts a very dark shadow over us. Um, how do you see this element of taboo evolving in Maltese literature across the years? Is it still there? Are there things we are not speaking about in literary terms?
Okay, so I think you pretty much put your finger on it. We're supposed to give a good picture. We can say what we like among ourselves. We can criticize, but for the outsider, we're supposed to give a pretty picture. And it's a unwritten rule, but when you don't follow it, it's a bit like you're betraying your country. You're a bit of a traitor. You're selling us the family. You're washing the family linen in public, and that sort of attitude. And yes, it's also very strong in journalism. And we saw over, in the last 50 years, since 2000, what was it, 16 or 17?
17.
When a journalist can take it all the way, when you're not supposed to say these things to the world. These are our things. We shouldn't expose these things that are happening here. It's our business. When she exposed all these things, Daphne, it cost her life. That's the extent to which this is not just a trivial matter. It is a very deep cultural understanding, and you break it at your own peril. That's understood. You do it, you're fair game now. Anyway, so I think that's a very real taboo, and it's in journalism as well as in writing. But within the context of literature, which is where you started from, I think your introduction is gives a very deep and structured context to how this trend in our literary history has developed. I mean, it's already a historical moment. The 80s and 90s are not 2024, So it's a historical moment. It's a voice, it's an anger that's very much connected to that day. Today, there are different issues. But you provide that literary history that helps us, and you emphasize a lot the sort of, the romantic, the tail end of Italian romanticism that was still wagging over here. And also that was always presenting, the woman as this gentle, home-loving, obedient creature. The man, this the good man who worked for his family. We don't say what he did at the bar, what he did in Valletta, how he spoke with his friends. We leave all that out. So there was this, and it doesn't mean that some of the literature wasn't actually, beautifully written or had its own literary merits, but its intentions were very different. This writing, 80s and 90s, there is this frustration, that's even more than anger. Where can these young men go? How can they get out of this? There's like no way out. It's bleak. What's happening now is, from what I see, a big opening into, for instance, performance art, a sort of blending of a lot of genres, not just within the literary itself, but literary with performance, with music, with video, a sort of blending of artists, overlapping visions. What I see a lot also is, and this is always the case in Malta, poetry. We must be the country, the population with the most poets among us. Everybody writes poetry. And we like the short story. We're not very big on the novel. Every now and then we get a good one, like a strip. But we're not big on the novel. It's short stories and poetry. And there's some beautiful poetry. Adrian Grima, for instance. Yeah, there's a Norbert Bugeja. This is all work I really like. But yeah, but we're very strong in that vein. So the new work I see, like people like Sam Vassallo and others, is this this blending of performance into the written, into the music, into the visual, and it becomes an artifact that is multidimensional and multimodal, which can still work, and translation can become an integral part of that, because in a way what's happening, there's a lot of intersemiotic translation. It starts with words, but you might have the music and the visual sort of representation or translation of, and the way the different forms might complement each other is a sort of, an interweaving and a sort of translationality that's going on.
I get the impression it's also probably from where I'm coming from, in terms of when I was born, my generation, etc. That excuse me, that the artistic trends of young people nowadays are more internationalized and less particular.
Yeah.
As if we are no longer an island now. Even though we may write poetry in Maltese, we will be influenced by as much, and if not even more, artistic products from abroad than from Malta.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this rapid and very fast internationalization of our artistic scene. What do you make of this? This is
Okay.
something very distinct from what used to take place previously, when there were literary movements, so to speak, that had or were related to one particular or two or three particular styles of writing. So now it's very different. It is because now instead of having a movement, now you have this internationalization, as you said, and this very wide diversity.
Yeah. Okay, from where I stand, I mean, mine is just one voice, one perception among others about this. But from where I stand, what I see is we've always been influenced to some degree. I mean, there was Italian literature, then what were they called? Il Aumen Letterario were also influenced by a lot of English literature and T.S. Eliot, and so that there was foreign influence, yes. That it's combined with a more local reaction to it in the creation of movements and the localizing of it also. That this does not seem to happen anymore, I completely agree. But here we are. There is no island anymore. Not to repeat the old John Donne phrase, but the point is, in this digital, technological, connected world, there doesn't need to be an island. So when we grew up, Malta was quite isolated. You couldn't, with a Maltese passport, just go and spend 2 months in Berlin because you, or you know, get a job there, or London. We couldn't. We didn't have these opportunities. We were an island, and this is where we were stuck. Unless, you know, I don't know what you did, but it wasn't easy to get out. Now you don't even need to get out to be out. Now you can enjoy what Malta has to offer without it getting in the way of all the things we couldn't do when we were young. You're still part of a scene, you know, that's partly in London, in Berlin, in Lisbon, in New York, here in your own office, in your own space. Doesn't mean this is where you want to remain all the time, yeah, but you can collaborate, you can create together. And so what I seem to be seeing is a lot of collaboration, collaborative projects, collaborative ideas. And even in translation, we're talking a whole lot about collaborative translation, like many translators working on a single piece or working closely with the author, which is something I would like to do more with local authors. And I always try and give my work back and get a comment, and I want them to read before it goes to publication. But it can be even more collaborative than that. So collaboration and the elimination of isolation, that has changed things. We don't have to rebel against those same barriers. They don't exist. We're lucky enough to have a local language and culture. Our second language is the world language. So, you know, all doors are open. And those of us who are even luckier might also speak Spanish, another world language, Arabic, another, Chinese. You know, people with 3 good languages can go anywhere. So maybe that's what's at the bottom of the change. But I don't know. I don't know exactly. I haven't seen any recent publications say of, well, I mean, I know Lara Kalea just published a new novel. I translated her Kisir to Kullumkin. It's been translated into 2 languages of mine, but my English one still hasn't been translated in English. But so at least a bridge serves that function. Yeah, so I don't know of many novels, but maybe the novel itself is a genre that is, you know, in changing drastically and becoming an instrument that can be used in different ways, not just the traditional open a book from one cover to another. So technology changes everything. Technology created the book. Technology gave us the manuscript. Technology is giving us the way we read now and the way we write. It's not just the way we read, it's also the way we write and even the way we translate.
Professor, what do you think are the main foreign influences that are echoed throughout the works of the anthology?
This sense of, you know, again, this overused word, but this sense of a more, not the authentic, a more authentic voice, a voice overheard in all its illogicality, in its machismo and patriarchal attitudes. In fact, look, one story we haven't touched on at all is Loran Vellas, which of course is a whole different angle, and it's a female point of view, and it's again, it focuses on sexuality, but in a different way, in again what was a more taboo, not, you know, not that it always existed, but it was more taboo. All, you know, sexuality, gender identity, all of this is, you know, commonplace nowadays. We're not breaking taboos, it's commonplace. We live it, we see it, you know, good luck to everyone. I mean, as long as they're loving, not killing each other, go ahead. The wars are the problems, not the people who love each other. Yeah.
And in order to conclude, I would like to ask you one of my favorite questions. Professor, what are you reading as of lately?
I am reading Elif Shafak for a book club, and it's a really enjoyable read. The Architect's Apprentice. So 1550, Suleiman the Magnificent, at the time when the Great Siege is happening here. They don't mention the Great Siege at all. And Martin McInnes in Ascension, which is a really interesting sci-fi. It's the depths of the ocean, up into space. It's another very good one, very different.
Okay, very interesting
no,
reads, Professor. Thank you very much for being with us today. We've been discussing literary translation and the anthology of Mischievous Maltese literature, which Professor Vassallo has translated. Thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you around another time in another literary project. Thank you again, Professor.
Mark, thank you very much for the invitation to do it. I enjoyed it very much. I think it's an interesting piece of work. I hope it's, leaves a mark and is a window into our writing for other people who don't speak Maltese. So, great that you're doing that. And good luck with the publishing house.
Thank you very much. We're doing our best. Thank you, Professor. Good luck with your projects as well. Thank you again.
Okay. Bye.